Hey everybody, Mike with Games Play Badly, and today on Session 0, I talked to Josh with Lone Colossus Games. They have a brand new module for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons called Injuries and Vile Deeds. They have 12 new subclasses, hundreds of feats and spells, and a brand new way to spice up combat. You'll hear more about that in the interview, but it sounds pretty awesome. I can't wait. Their Kickstarter is actually running right now, and I'll link that down below. Make sure you get over there before it's absolutely closed and over with, because there's some pretty good stretch goals in there as well. As I mentioned in my last video, Matt from gemfirefly.com has come on as an official sponsor of Games Play Badly. That's where I got all these amazing shirts from. So if you want an amazing shirt too, go over to gemfirefly.com, browse around, and put in Badly15, B-A-D-L-Y 15 at checkout for 15% off your order. I can't wait for you to get a chance to meet Josh. That interview starts now. Josh, how are you?
Pretty good.
Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate you talking to me today. I know that you have a Kickstarter currently running, and from what I've read, it looks pretty impressive. I mean, you're talking 12 subclasses, over 100 feat, spells, items, new monsters, and a new way of doing combat to an extent. Why don't you explain that to me?
Yeah, sure. So there the 12 subclasses, that's one for every class. Pretty sure I did my math right on that. And then for the injury systems, everything in the book is going to work with these injury systems, right? So there's one for PCs, and then there's another one for enemies. And the reason for having separate ones is that although they're going to use the same core mechanics, for player characters, the injury that you get might be a little bit randomized. There's going to be a table, but it's going to still be by severity. Whereas for the enemies, the players themselves are going to get to say, hey, I want to do, I want to attack his sword arm, or I want to, slash at their legs, or try to open up a plate in their armor or something like that to try and actually inflict a specific injury. And then there also will be some sort of, non-specific or like special injuries that aren't under a specific category. So one that's come up already in my games that I've already added is silenced. So like if you want to prevent someone from calling for help, and you just like punch them in the throat, right? You're not necessarily gonna like slice their throat, because that would be lethal, but you can prevent them from calling for help. And there might be like a way, much harder one to inflict that would actually prevent them from casting verbal spells or something. Didn't want to go there with the initial injury, because that's pretty powerful, but we'll see. So there's going to be rules on doing special injuries that don't fall into other categories, and it's pretty easy to handle as a GM. You just kind of pick a threshold and you go, okay, it's going to be this hard, just like if you're setting a DC basically. Mm-hmm. So, and then all of the monsters and everything are going to work with that. So there might be some monsters that go, oh, if I hit you with this attack, you get a special injury that makes you bleed or something like that, and you could cure it in the same way you can cure any other injury. Where it might have a special duration, or take the place of one of your other injury slots, which means that the next time you get hurt, it's going to be worse, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads into the fact that it's called Injuries and Vile Deeds, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the other aspect, so monsters, and then I also mentioned there's going to be villainous NPCs in the book, and well, there will be character options for villains, because I know people like playing villains. It's just there's also going to be character options for heroes, because obviously a lot of groups want to be heroes. You want to fight against villains, and so there's going to be tools for both. But for the villainous NPCs, they're going to have plot hooks. They'll have their own motivations and everything written into them. So if you see a villain, you're like, oh, I love this person, or this villain looks awesome, you can toss them into your game. There might be some that are designed to be big bosses, and there might be some that are just like, oh, this is your average cultist lieutenant, and like they're a big deal, they're a major NPC, but you can slide them in under any other NPC you've already made in your game.
Yeah, and it looks like you're going to be I mean, obviously for stretch goals for the Kickstarter that's actually running right now as of filming, there are some interesting stretch goals out there too. One of them, I believe the first one's a one shot, right?
Yep. That will add a one-shot adventure that kind of, eases you into the game. It'll like highlight all of the things that you need to learn to use this system. You know, basically like it's an adventure that you can do in one shot, right? It's a one shot.
Right.
And so it'll focus on that. It might not cover as many of the sort of long-term dealing with the long-term effects, because a lot of the injuries are designed to take multiple days to recover from, you know, multiple long rests. That's part of the whole point of the system, at least on the player's side. But certainly, you know, it'll get you used to running monsters that use injuries, you know, running with injury thresholds and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of there being of being maimed or having an injury that takes several days to recover from. I've always found that the D&D aspect of a long rest heals all wounds to be a little bit unrealistic. So for those people who kind of feel like I do, having something that takes a couple, like a broken arm per se, or sprained ankle, or you know,
Right.
those types of things, that they're not something that is necessarily, you know, rectified with one good night's rest.
Yeah, and part of the I think part of the reason, so the reason why in 5e, I think, and in 4e as well, you got all of your hit points back when you rest, is those aren't, that's not physical damage, that's your stamina, that's your luck. It's, you know, how much effort it's going to take someone to actually cause harm to you. And it's only when you hit 0 hit points, you start making those death saves, that you've actually maybe had any physical harm done. And so with the injury system having these damage thresholds, you're not, you know, just getting hit isn't necessarily going to injure you. Getting a big hit probably will. And if you're not knocked unconscious, that means that you're still, you know, in a capable fighting form. You're not going to be injured that badly. But if it knocks you down, that means someone got in a potentially lethal blow. They did some real damage. And so you're, you know, depending on what threshold gets hit, depending on the injuries you have, you could actually sustain a pretty severe injury that way.
So is this written probably more with 5e in mind, or can it be used with other editions?
Yeah, so I mean, it's written for 5e, but with the way the mechanics work, I think if you just adjust some of the, you know, oh, this injury gives you advantage, or this, or do, you know, disadvantage, or like, you know, targeting the enemy with it, you maybe give someone an advantage on saves against them, that sort of thing. Those effects would have to get converted, but I think with the damage thresholds, you could easily use it for Pathfinder. You could probably convert it into 3.5. Not sure about 4th edition. That would be interesting to see, but I think 4e is pretty solid in its construction. I wouldn't want to mess with it too much.
Yeah. 4e was written to be played by 4e, and modules made for 4e. It was very insular. Right. So, yeah. But yeah, so that's good to know. I mean, I think everything can be converted with a little bit of work. But so what inspired you to start this whole project?
Yeah. So I mean, part of it is I know a lot of people don't run high level D&D, but I like to run, you know, level 1 to 20, or, you know, 5 to 18 or whatever. You know, I do kind of longer campaigns and I go pretty high level. And by the time you get to mid levels, even, you know, characters will go down every fight, or, you know, they'll go through these really rough combats. And in order to, and that's even in order to challenge them, right? Like, I mean, if you go by CR, everyone knows pretty much that, like, CR is a toss up, right? Sometimes it's just right, sometimes it's totally off, you know, way too easy, way too hard. And so, you know, you have to do other designs, but you know, even just like to challenge the party and to really like make things feel difficult for the characters, it meant knocking them down every fight. And you know, people can just pop back up and be fine. And so you have these healing words that go out right before their turn. It's like, oh yeah, you just get like 5 hit points back, do your attack, get knocked out, come back up, and everything's fine. It's like, I mean, sure. I mean, if you want to play like a superhero game, yeah, that's great. But you know, if you're looking for something just even a little bit more realistic or a little bit more gritty, having something to track physical harm is super nice. And then certainly, like we talked about earlier, you know, healing up on a long rest, right? I think it's super important for characters to get their hit points back and to recover spell slots and everything on a long rest. There are, you know, there's options for slower healing, but that also discourages fighting, or, you know, can really push back on things in a way that you don't necessarily want in your campaign, depending on what you're playing. And so with the injuries, you might have, you can get rid of the main effect of the injury and you have like a longer lasting effect, or it just takes up the slot, similar to if you've played Fate or other systems where you have basically injuries that you get based on how bad your defense was or whatever, right? And so there's a consequences that stay with you, but they're not necessarily like, oh, you'll never be able to do anything functional, right? Like you can still fight, you're still going to be fine, you're just going to have some mild penalties. The biggest thing is if you push yourself and you keep getting injured, then things are going to look, it's going to look really grim for you. And I think that's even good for players, because you can choose, okay, like I know the next time I get injured, or the next 2 times I get injured, I could die. Like there's a very good chance that I will just outright die from injuries. Then as a player, you really get to make that choice of, am I going to die or not? Right? You can say, okay, I'm going to make this heroic sacrifice. We're going to push on, we're going to fight. And yeah, I might die. That's fine. Or you can say, okay, look, we're really in rough shape. We have to rest. We can't keep going. If we die, everyone's screwed. So we'll take a break. The villain maybe gets, they get a few days, or they get a week, or however long it's going to take us to recover, to do their plans. Hopefully our allies can do something about it in that time, but we need to take a break. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. And certainly there are going to be guidelines if you want to speed up recovery, if you want to slow things down. And you can use the 2 systems independently too. So if you really like, oh yeah, I like cold shots, I want my players to be able to, chop off a limb or open up a plate of armor, whatever. You can do that, and you don't have to use player injuries. And you can also do the other way around. I think the monster injuries are really cool, and I don't know why you wouldn't use them. But if you only want to have players get injured, yeah, you can do that too. They're totally independent. So,
well, I think what you're trying to do, and from what I'm hearing, it seems like it's getting pretty effective, is add some gravitas to a fight.
right.
So I mean, from that standpoint, there is a consequence for overextending yourself,
Right.
and
Yeah.
doing something that you maybe shouldn't do, and it's not solved in 8 hours.
Right.
And I think there are probably a lot of players who would really enjoy that. I as a DM enjoy it being quick and easy, because my players are quick and easy. But if I was
Yep.
up with a different group, I may go that direction where it's like, okay, now there are some injuries that are going to happen where you may have disadvantage on rolls for 3 or 4 days while you're recovering. And, now how do you handle magical healing in the
Right.
response to all of this?
Yeah. So that was one of the first questions my players had for me was, oh, well, can I just cast regeneration? Or, what happens if I'm a druid and I am wild shaped? And to a certain extent, I mean, yeah, you could make a ruling one way or another, to say like, oh yeah, you won't have to deal with it. But I think to make things fair, it's just sort of, I have a little note in the rules on wild shape of like, okay, if you get injured, that injury is going to carry over to any form you're in, because that's something that has traumatized your body basically. And even if you wild shape, it's still going to affect you. For something like regeneration, it can remove an injury, but whenever you heal an injury too quickly, then your body still has to recover from those effects. So there's injuries, and then there's, I forget exactly, I think lasting effects is what they're currently called, might have something else that I end up with naming them. But basically the point is, magical healing works, but it only goes so far. You can heal hit points. That's great. That's your stamina, right? Like, okay, I feel better because you gave me, some pain medication. It did not heal the actual wound. And so you can use magic to make the healing easier, but you're still going to probably want to have someone trained in medicine take a look at you. And so, yeah, so you can definitely remove things using magic, but you're going to still deal with these lasting effects. And if you build up those enough, depending on what it is, it can stack up to 3 times. And then you're going to not be able to heal any injuries anymore. Or if it's one that won't allow stacking, then you heal that one, then you have that lasting effect, and it lasts longer than the injury did originally. It's a lesser effect than the injury, but it's still there. And the next time you have an injury of that severity, you can't remove it until that lasting effect has been removed. So yeah, it definitely, magical healing is an option, but I went with kind of the flavor of, yeah, your body can only take so much, and even if you magically heal it, it's still gonna be
Right.
exhausted.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just like if you have a physical injury where you have a broken bone, and it kind of, not to be too graphic, folks, but it pops through the skin. Just because the skin heals doesn't mean the bone is knitted.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And in terms of character injuries, I've tried to steer away from you know, maiming characters. There are some options where you could choose to describe it as such.
Mhm.
But it's easy enough to say, oh, you sprained this, or it's been fractured, or you're not going to be like permanently affected if
Dislocated.
you don't want to, right? Yeah. So it's definitely, there's room for players to choose kind of how that affects them. um, so I think, and I think that's something that I love about the monster injuries, is it really encourages players to describe how they're attacking, right? What does their attack look like? And they can, you can still wait until you hit, you can wait until you deal your damage. And then instead of the GM saying, oh yeah, this is what it looks like, then you can really just have the players do it, which is great as GM because it lightens the workload tremendously.
Absolutely. I think everything that you've added as far as all the injuries go, it adds uh um a visual texture.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously D&D is very theater of the mind. So when you start talking about some of these physical injuries, it definitely adds to the grit of the game.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought of with that was just, if you're already, some players are already great at doing descriptions, some aren't. That's totally fine. I think this will help. But if you're already doing this, now you have mechanics for it, right? Like if you've always wanted, it's like, oh, I want to describe, attacking this way or whatever. Now you have mechanics for it. You can do a special injury, like I mentioned. And so it's just nice to have, regardless of if you already play like that or
Yeah,
not.
right. Yeah, I mean, it basically gives you a scaffolding to go ahead and be as creative as you want to be in your
Yep.
descriptions.
Yep.
So how long have you been developing this?
Yeah, I've been working on this for 3 years. It's been in its current state for 1 year, and that's been developed across two parts of the campaign. So it's like a 1.5 year campaign. Um, I think I started developing it near the end of the previous campaign, and then we kind of moved into the current iteration by the end of the last one. So
That's very cool. I mean, that's a lot of work.
yeah, my players have been very gracious by play testing it. There were definitely times where it was like, I made a mistake. This is way too hard. We're gonna we're gonna redo that.
Mhm.
But that's play testing, right? You're gonna
Right.
go through
That's
that.
what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. And I hope that we'll get some more play testing done. There's a plan to release some beta rules at some point to the backers, and obviously if they have a stretch goal that if we get 200 retweets on that announcement tweet, that'll happen as soon as the campaign ends and is funded. Otherwise, assuming it's funded, then that'll go out at some point whenever I have some more time to piece some extra stuff into it, and then we'll send that out.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot. What you've done already is a ton of work.
Yeah, I have in my Google Doc is like 50 pages of writing
Yeah,
or something at this
yeah.
point. There's plenty more work to go into it. um yeah.
So once you're funded, when do you expect to be a release?
So I set the delivery date as December 2022.
Okay.
And that's just to give me a lot of time because I'm doing this on my own and it's not
Yeah.
currently a full-time job. Be great. I
Yeah.
don't
Right.
don't expect to reach that level of funding, but hey, that'd be nice. But yeah, and then we need time to gather all the art and do play testing and get that all packaged up and nice and ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, the artwork alone. I mean, everyone I've talked to, it's always been about artwork. I mean, just trying to get you have to find the right artist who
Yep.
encapsulates your style of play and your style of storytelling, and then artists can get busy, and so they
Yeah,
may not necessarily be able to do everything for you right at once. So
right.
it takes a while.
Yep. And I do have some artists lined up. So the two that did the art that's displayed on the Kickstarter page
Hmm.
are planning, assuming I get funded, to do more work with me, and I love their work, so I'm happy to do that. And then I have a couple of other artists that I already talked to and said that yeah, they were probably going to be open for more commissions. So
Very
um,
cool.
that was super important for me to get done first. Is hey, let's find some artists. Let's know how much this is going to cost, because obviously art is
Yeah.
expensive, and that's a big
Hmm.
part of the funding is art. That's why a lot of the stretch goals are additional art, and that's if we reach those stretch goals, that all of that extra money probably will go into art.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that brought me in when I first started playing first edition years ago, was just that black and white artwork, and it's so iconic in my mind as to what D&D was, because that's all we had.
Yeah,
Having second edition roll around, you actually had color artwork. I was like, holy smokes, this is amazing.
yeah, it's always interesting seeing like older editions and what kind of art style, because there's a new art style for every edition.
Hmm.
Right. And I entered in 3.5,
Hmm.
and then going from 3.5 to fourth edition when that came out, I didn't play a lot of it right away,
Hmm.
but I saw the rule books and was like, oh man, this is like beautiful, like very, very, very vibrant colors, right? And then 5e is I think sort of a mix between the two of them. They've got the vibrant colors, they've got all of that, but they also have a little bit more of the like, sort of grittiness that 3.5 and earlier editions had.
Yeah, yeah. It's artwork was how I used to. Well, that's how I used to buy albums. When I buy albums, they had to have a cool album cover. When I buy sci-fi books, the cover had to be cool looking. And obviously, I found out real quick that that wasn't always the best way to buy a book or
Right.
an album. But I mean, artwork is a big part of it.
Yeah.
So, Josh, I have to ask you, what is one of your favorite things that you created for this module?
Yeah. I think one of my favorite things is the chain spider, which actually came from one of my nightmares that I had.
Oh, wow.
Um, when I talk about terrifying monsters, some of them are truly terrifying. Um, this one is a template, actually, and it's meant to be applied to any humanoid. And basically, I'm not going to describe it because it's pretty horrifying, but you take a humanoid and you transform them into a chain spider, and then they get sort of, the ability to control chains. Imagine, like a spider can shoot webs, they shoot spiked chains.
Ooh.
And yeah, so they can like control metal and chains and whatnot. Um, and yeah, I suppose it's not the best description here because it's
I'm getting a
a little
very
bit rough,
Hellraiser
but
vibe from that.
yeah, kind of. I guess there are what chain devils, those
Mhm.
exist, but instead of, I think those are usually like made of chains, right? This is like a humanoid Spider-Man type creature, except very twisted and shoots chains instead of web. um yeah, and then I guess there along a similar line, there's the Fallen, which are, if you're familiar with the Reavers from Firefly, they're very
Oh,
much in
yeah.
that line of things.
Ooh.
So they can inflict um, what do I call it? A mind scar, um, and it's a pretty low DC to save against it. But if you get enough of them, then you join them. And so they're one of those
Ooh.
monsters that like their CR is higher simply because they have that ability.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to go, what was it, like wraiths and shadows or something in the monster manual, you have to be really careful of, because they're kind of low CR, but they can easily crush a party because they killed you, now you're a wraith and you're fighting against the party, and it's like
Right, right. Yeah,
hang on.
yeah.
So they're not quite that swinging. It takes some time to take effect, but yeah, it's definitely if you wanted to run a horror game, they're a great monster for it.
That's great. Those sound like a lot of fun. If that's just a piece of what you have to offer, I can't wait to read the rest.
Yeah, well, and then obviously there's the Angel of Blood that we've got that image for, and I love that image. It turned out so well that I'm actually going to make a special NPC for it, and that's it's like kind of a solar angel level,
Mhm.
except very evil. So
Ooh,
I'm
yeah.
excited to do that. I haven't actually put that mechanics together yet.
Well, I mean, that all sounds fantastic. I'm really looking forward to everything coming out. I want to see what it's all about. I'm always looking to spice up my game a little bit. I mean, I'm one of those old school guys. I used to use the critical hits and fumbles table because I always thought that was really fun. I found it rather lame that you roll a one and kill yourself, but it
Right.
happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a luck of the die, and this is a different mechanic altogether from that standpoint. But
Yeah.
it is something I think that adds a lot of character to a game.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up. Those kind of like random tables were something that I really specifically wanted to move away from with
Mhm.
this, because sometimes you roll on them and it just like, so yeah, so sometimes you'll you'll take 50 damage and it's like, oh, I sprained my ankle, and it's like 50 out of 60 health that you took.
Yeah,
And then other times like, oh, I took 10 damage. Oh, you lost your arm. What? Like, where did this come,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
so yeah, having these like based on threshold and not having it be completely random was very important.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, there were many a time when someone would roll a critical fumble with a bow and lose their arm, and I'm going, how does
yeah.
I guess the I don't know, but yeah. So I agree with you in the fact that the random tables are fun, but you really have to make sure that if you're the DM, you're not rolling them in front of the player, so that way you can modify what you need to modify to keep it within character or campaign or logic. And B, they don't always make sense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and we really
So,
want them to make sense because we're here to make a narrative. I mean, there are obviously games where it's like, yeah, we want to have it be completely chaotic and random, and those
yeah,
can be a lot of fun.
they can
But
be.
that's not usually every game.
Right, right. Yeah, I think what you're doing right now is a huge has a huge place in where people are going with D&D right now. I think that there are a lot of players that really want to spice up their adventures, and they're creating their own stuff as it is.
Mhm.
But it sounds like what you've created is pretty epic, and I can't wait to see it.
Thanks.
So with my guests, I do a little speed round. I'm going to ask you five very hard hitting investigative questions, and you must answer them.
All
Are
right.
you ready?
Sure.
Spring or fall?
S- Fall.
Okay. Any specific reason?
It tends to be nicer for longer. Spring tends to it's super nice and then it's really hot, whereas fall is like, okay, it's gonna cool down and cool down and cool down. Eventually, it gets really cold and it's winter, but yeah, fall is just really nice weather.
It is, and it's beautiful too. I mean, when you think
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Sugar cone or waffle cone?
Waffle cone easily.
Yeah, absolutely. There are people who actually pick sugar, and I don't know why.
I mean, it could be a size thing, but I
I
mean, a cookie on a
guess.
waffle cone is better. So
Yeah. I mean, I like those big old heavy waffle cones with all the
yeah.
goodness, and yeah, it's delicious. Cake or pie?
Oh, that one's really tough. Uh, Usually I'll say cake, but if I've had cake recently, I might say pie.
So what are your two favorites? Like, give me your favorite cake and your favorite pie.
Favorite cake is going to be a really rich flourless chocolate cake.
Ooh, yeah.
I love dark chocolate, and so like I'm not usually a fan of like super sugary things.
Yeah.
And then for pie, oh god, it's such a toss up between just apple and strawberry and rhubarb.
Oh my
Probably
God,
apple.
I'm really impressed you mentioned strawberry rhubarb because no one thinks about rhubarb anymore. It's like this what do they call it? Or like artisanal thing now.
Yeah,
Where but a rhubarb is delicious.
yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's nice because I mean, there's a ton of sugar in it, but it's not like sugary because the rhubarb is super sour, so it kind of absorbs that
Oh,
sugar
it's
taste.
wonderful. The
Yeah.
texture is wonderful too. Yeah.
Hmm.
For some reason, I'm on a food kick. I just had dinner, but I think I'm hungry again. Uh, Hamburger or hot dog?
Usually I would say hamburgers, just because I like burgers better. I really love brats though.
Well, you're a Wisconsin kid, so
That's true. That's true. But yeah, kind of growing up, I was like, oh, hot dogs, those are made of like, random garbage meat. Like, I don't know if I should be eating those, but I've had some good hot dogs, so I'm slowly changing my opinion on that.
Yeah, I might say Nathan's has a really good hot dog. Hebrew National does a good one. You know, I'm going to tell you, and this is something that for Illinoisans is going to be a little bit of a shocker, but the best hot dog I've had in Illinois, please don't kill me, people, Home Depot. And I am not lying. My husband feels the same way.
They sold those.
They're so good. I don't know what it is. I mean, they steam them and they're just delicious. I think they use Hebrew National. I don't know what it is. There is a hot dog stand that is renowned called Gene and Jude's, and they've been around forever. And I don't like their hot dogs. They're limp and they're flavorless, and I just don't like. They're good if they do this thing where you get like a double dog and you throw fries on it and do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. But I'm like, the dog itself is kind of meh. But I'm gonna tell you, Home Depot hot dogs blew me out of my pants. I was really surprised. Well, Josh, it was really good having you on. I am going to post everything down below. So there'll be links to the Kickstarter, links to Josh's website. And also, if you like this video, click the like. If you want to subscribe, hit the subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. It could really help me make some more videos. So, Josh, let's get together again after the Kickstarter and talk and see how you did.
Yeah.
And I wish you all the best.
Thanks.